So, welcome back to Racing Back, and Freddie's back. I'm so pleased. What a first episode with Freddie Spencer. We're on episode 2. They're probably in episode 3, to be honest. We haven't even scratched the surface yet. And Freddie, Julian, when we were off air, still talking about Brands Hatch and watching you in action, and it was an eye opener to us all.
Eye opener doesn't do it justice, and as I said in the first one, I was sat quite high up in the grandstand, just at paddock, just before, and I appeared to be looking down on you as a 90-degree view of the fairing of your TZ. You were, it just didn't look right. You were so far over so early.
Yes, and there was a reason for that, Julian, is because as I described about my dirt tracking experience, I learned at a very early age to pay attention to, everything that was happening in front of me. I'll give you an example. So then that way, that will help you understand my ability to look ahead and know what to do going in paddock. Is when I was a young boy riding my yard, I would I'd hit trees all the time. Back in my yard had over 200 trees, from the yard didn't. And so it gave me the opportunity, and precision was key, right? You hit a tree enough times, it hurts after a while. It knocked the wind out of me. So, part of what I dealt with in Louisiana was the change in weather conditions. And so I figured out, if I paid attention to the color of the leaves in front of me, because, in the fall, in the fall season, the leaves would fall. And so if they were dark, that meant that it was wet under the leaves. And so that would determine my trajectory and my lean angle to get through there, because it was going to slide and I could miss the tree that was on the exit. If it was, the leaves were light colored, then that means it was drier under there and I can carry more speed, more lane angle, and so forth. And so I analytically figured that out at a very early age. And so my approach to every corner was, my lane angle was based on the environment, what was coming next, the trajectory I wanted. And specifically at Brands, I learned in the first couple laps through paddock, the elevation change, because it would kind of trail off and go away from us. The track would, it's downhill and with a little bit of off camber. So I had all that lean angle early, specifically for one reason, and that was because I could then get the bike rotated early. So I would allow the track to, instead of being a negative, it was a positive for me. And I could accelerate harder, pick up the bike sooner to be able to accelerate harder down the hills as the track transitioned from flat, a little bit helping, to hurting on the exit. And that allowed me to get the drive down the hill, which is where I passed Graham Crosby. That first lap in race 1 was on the exit of paddock. He went in there like all the other riders were doing. Gradual turn in, because the track would then go away from them. And so they couldn't drive down the hill like I was able to do by getting the bike on its side earlier and get it rotated. Now, all of that knowledge, all of that analytical approach, all of that understanding is what allowed me to learn Brands Hatch, and use it to my advantage. And so my drive up the hill was quicker than everybody else's into the hairpin. And so that is basically why you saw what you were seeing I was doing. I was doing it to put the bike in the best position to maximize the drive down the hill and compensate for the track working against it.
There will be dozens and dozens of people who think they know their way around Brands Hatch listening to this, having to reassess a few ideas.
So this was all 1980, Freddie. 1981, you were champing at the bit to come Grand Prix racing, but Honda said, wait a year, didn't they?
They did. They did. As I was saying earlier in the first part was Erie Majuri and I were sitting in his car in the fall of '80. I went to Japan to actually I rode the NR 500 at
Yes.
Suzuka, and
How
I
was
didn't
that?
race it or anything. I was just there
Yeah.
testing it, and it was the first time that I understood, in Japanese, what they call a hurricane on the Pacific side versus what we call a hurricane. And they kept saying, "We must hurry. This storm is coming." And it was a hurricane, and or like what would be a hurricane for us. And so anyway, I tested the bike, went quick on it. It was the first time I rode the NR 500, and so I went back to Tokyo to the factory, and that's where Erie said that we're gonna be a year away from, won't be in '81. And as I said earlier, I stayed. I trusted him, and he said we'll build a bike for you to win the world championship on. And so I waited, but I got an amazing opportunity. Um, when they brought the NS 500, they only had the engine ready. They brought it to American Honda, and I was doing the American Honda Championship and doing some Grand National Championship flat tracking races. And I remember that, and Irv was there, and Irv was working with Barry, and the plan was, he was going to gain some experience, and then, I pre-told him about, HRC, and so we were being shown the engine for the first time. And when they took the lid off the box, we were sitting at the desk at American Honda, and I'll never forget Irv's reaction. It's when they took the cover off. He goes, "It's missing a cylinder," right? Right?
Yeah.
Like, because Irv. I mean, Irv doesn't miss where he's very direct. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't. He's not critical. He's just
Yeah.
nice. Congenial Irv. And
Yeah.
and he just grinned. And then they explained the concept of well, narrow lighter. And Honda, especially at the time, coming off the NR 500 project, they were doing something different,
Yeah.
which I admired and was so privileged to be a part of. But anyway, regressing back to the reason why they showed us the engine, and then we go to Laguna. And Kenny's there as the defending world champion. In those days, we didn't have a Grand Prix in the U.S., so Kenny would race Daytona and Laguna. And I would do the same, for the American fans. And so I was there riding Irv's TZ750 that I'd raced the year before, but this is '81. And so they brought the NR 500 over for me to race against Kenny in the Formula One class, which was the national class in American road racing. Well, we didn't push start, we live start, which was one good thing. In the heat race, it's 5-lap heat race, no qualifying, just 5-lap heat race. Well, we start the heat race, I get a jump on Kenny, get in front of him, and basically he can't pass me for 5 laps. And so I win this heat race on this NR 500 with Kenny in second. And so you would have thought I won a Grand Prix. I come in because this bike had not done anything, and it was just 5 laps. But they were so excited, and which I appreciate. Well, in the race, in the national the next day, the bike broke. It had, because it would the valves would break the stems, and it would overheat. And anyway, long story short, after the race, they say, Freddie son, we have decided now that we're going to take this bike and you to Silverstone in 2 weeks to race at the Grand Prix. And I'm like, okay, you know. Now, the difference between Silverstone and Laguna is like a parking lot in Bonneville, right? I mean, it is, we geared the thing at Laguna so short that I could run the thing between 19 and 21,000 RPM and quick shifted. And that's what allowed me to stay in front of Kenny, basically for those 5 laps. Well, we get Silverstone, and with the high gearing, this thing has so little torque that just coming on a hanger straight, I get a breeze. And as I'm taking it off the edge of the tire and getting onto the bigger part of the tire, the RPM would drop. I mean, even though I got it was really not, obviously made for a silver like Silverstone was. But I, anyway, rode it hard and basically qualified it okay, got a decent start, got it up to fourth in the race before it broke.
There are
And
several stories attached to that race.
yes.
Many years ago, I wrote a book on Honda V4s and did a lot of digging into
Okay. All
the
right.
NR
Let's go.
500 history, and sort of post the publication, Japanese start telling you things to tell you you're wrong. They didn't tell me when I was writing it, but they sort of tell you afterwards. I was given the impression, not directly, that the death of the NR 500 was when even you could not win on it. And that at Silverstone, you mentioned, that basically you had to rev it to stay.
Oh yeah. I mean, listen, it didn't. The thing is that they told me this at Laguna, and that's why I used the visual of a parking lot versus Bonneville.
Yeah.
The difference in the course. And so even that was the first cassette gearbox I'd ever seen, obviously. Yes. And so I remember I came in after the first session at Laguna, and I said, because they told me, what the RPM, the power band was like 13 to 20 and a half. And I said, there's no way that I can ride this thing revving it from 13,000, because coming out of the last corner, like for example, and going over the hill, it never would get to its maximum RPM to shift it to the next gear. So I didn't even know, that they could change the individual gears. And then they go, I said, we got to change the camshaft, rear sprocket. We got to gear it down. Can you gear it down? And they said, Freyson, we can do better. We can do each gear. I go, really? I said, then not use the 6 gear, let's use the 5, just 5, and I can short shift it. I would do that on 2 strokes. I learned how to work around power bands by using gearboxes and things. And so they were able to change gear and make it work at Laguna. So we get Silverstone, and I'm telling them I am beyond my grip limit getting in, and I'm getting on the throttle. Now, remember what I told you the story about my dad in Tulsa and my 500. Okay, so I'm riding this thing. You remember the old Silverstone, which I loved. I kind of like it better than the new one. That's just my personal opinion. Because it flowed and just, Abbey and, coming through Woodcott, it gave the rider so many opportunities to, maximize entry speed, rotate the bike, carrying speed, and all the things. Well, I was doing everything I could in practice to figure out a way, as I mentioned, that on the exit on the hanger straight, I would actually lose RPM as you take it off the smaller size of the tire of the edge and get to the bigger side. And if there was a crosswind, that would hurt me. So we were playing with the gearboxes and things, and they knew what I'd done at Laguna. They knew if the circumstances, we could put the bike in the right position, I could run the pace that Kenny was running. But we could not do anything to make the bike do that at Silverstone. And then that was an eye-opening, I think that was the final thing.
Yeah,
They
the final straw.
knew what I'd done at Laguna. They knew that if we could make the bike mechanically work and I could work it in that power band range, not at 13, but where it really had the power, which was its maximum power was between, it's like 17.5 or so and 20 and a half. Now, I would, and they knew it, I would I'd push it 20 and a half, 27, 20.8, because if I did, then when I shifted, it wouldn't drop back so much and then it would pick up the next gear. I mean, I was maximizing every foot of the racetrack I could to put the bike to minimize its deficiencies, which was the fact of not having the torque. The other thing was, and I don't know if Julian, you wrote about this or you talked on about this, but the problem wasn't getting the power on the NR 500. The problem was they could get the power, but they couldn't make it reliable.
Yes.
The material technology at the time was limited on how, because the engine friction, they get the power but it wouldn't be reliable, right? I mean, and so the engine, produced an amazing amount of power for its capacity because they were limited at that time, 500cc, 4-stroke, same as 2-stroke. And so that's the story behind basically their understanding of what I could do with the bike, given the right circumstances, but they knew the bike had its limitations on what we could do to put it in mechanically to help me to be able to minimize its deficiencies. I could do it, and I got it up to 4th in the race, like I said, but I was so far beyond entry-level grips and tucking the front and saving it and maximizing. I'd even keep the bike at more lean angle than I felt comfortable with on the exits because I had to make sure I got it, up in the 19 and a half, 20 and a half, before I picked it up off the edge of the tire. It was, and I told him, I said, I'm that's it. There is no more that I can do.
Yeah.
A classic case of it will not go any faster.
No, and if y'all can't figure out, and that's, that is why Honda, was in a position when MotoGP started that everybody knew that the only way to be competitive was the displacement on 4-strokes had to be 1,000cc against the 500s. The other thing is they had the materials figured out by then.
The metallurgy had moved on. Exactly.
Yes, and it's why as MotoGP bikes run so hot, you hear the riders talking about they're put in uncomfortable positions from just the heat that's generated from the power. And its simplest explanation, from the power and the friction at the horsepower they're at, they can only do so much to dissipate the heat. But the engines will withstand that amount of heat generated.
Yeah, and last limited supply of engines. And how often did we see a MotoGP Honda break? Nicky Hayden blowing one up going over the start line at Saxonry, and I can't think of another time.
Right. I mean, and that was the Evolution engine. That engine was designed specifically for Nicky so that they could put the engine forward. I told Ikanoi in 01 when he asked me about Nicky, I said, and I just said this to him at the time, was you build the bike, because I was working with Nicky. Merton Plumley and I were working with Nicky on the American Honda team. And I knew, he was a dirt tracker, and I knew his strengths and weaknesses. And one of his strengths was that you give him a bike that he can put a lot of load and pressure on the front to help get the bike rotated. Then Nicky was strong, and he could manage that positioning and putting the bike. So anyway, when they built the Evolution bike for him for the '06 season, they built him an engine because I've ridden it. I rode it in Japan after Nicky won the championship. And so Hiriki was excited about me. He said, "Did you notice the difference between that bike and what Petrosa was riding?" I said, "Of course. The engine was farther forward." And he said, "Well, they had to make it smaller. It's why that there's other stories behind it, but that's why that anyway." That helped Nicky to win the championship was what they did for him, and
That explains an incident at Laguna Seca. Irish television commentator Eddie Laycock, an old 500 privateer and TT winner, came running into the press office and said, "Have you seen Nicky down from the corkscrew? My lord, he trusts that front end." It was a hysterical Laycock waving his arms.
Right. And it was all a process of, that started when they were looking at Nicky, and then, my conversations at the time with Dick Noy, and then also Hiriki, Mr. Hiriki, who was my engine chassis, got his start with the carbon fiber rear wheel in '84. And then he was the main designer of the chassis for the '85 250 and figured out the right, what we call the triangle, which is the right front steering head angle versus engine position versus rear ride height, which came about through that process and with the Unipro link rear suspension. So when we fast forward to understanding what Nicky needed, Hiriki understanding the way to do it, he figured out the only way was to make him an engine overall that was smaller, and so they could get the engine as far forward as possible. And that's what he was seeing through the corkscrew.
Yeah. Well, the two-stroke came. Yeah, sorry, Julian. The two-stroke came along in '82. The Grand Prix started, and what a foretaste it was for the season. Argentina, Kenny, Barry, and Freddie on the new Honda. What a race!
I think it shocked everybody, Nick.
It did, yeah.
Right? I understand. A little bit of background to that. The first time I actually got to ride the 3-cylinder was January '82.
Whoa.
Okay. And that was a one day at Laguna Seca. We co-shared the track with Paul Newman. It was the first time I got to meet Paul Newman. But anyway, that's another story. But and that was a cool part of what came out of the day, because riding the bike was not good. That thing vibrated so bad the first time I rode it, and I was, I had 2 runs on a 500, so my experience level was not, very good with the good 500. I'd only ridden that inline Yamaha 80 and the NR 500, but I knew that we were in trouble. This bike vibrated so bad that literally after 4 or 5 laps, I'd come in and I could still feel the shaking of the bike. And so I told him, and it was had the characteristics of a motocross engine or a dirt track engine, which I had much experience with. And I told Herb, I said, it's just ramp, ramp, ramp. It won't rev. It flattens out at this low RPM, and it vibrates so bad. And so literally that was the feedback that I gave to Irv, and that, we gave to the team. And you got to realize that HRC engineers had no experience, right? They were all learning. Now, we were fortunate to have the best engineers. At that time, the motorcycle side got the best engineers. And so the Hirikes and Kamiras and, all the engineers, from Mr. Aguma and Fukui, and, that would go on to do amazing things and products. That was their learning. And they were able to, between that ride in January of '82, to February end of February, and then March, and then I ran Daytona, and then we tested in Brazil. And it was the first time I got to meet Takazumi and Marco Lucanelli, and we ran together. And I was quickest. I was the quickest running in Lagos. And the difference. Now, this was only the second time I rode the bike.
Sure.
Okay, because if you go back to the end of '81 when they first wanted me to start testing it, I went to Japan 3 times, and all 3 times I got Japan, they wouldn't let me ride the bike because the test riders were in the hospital. The transmissions were locking up from all the vibration and cracking gears. And, I was very fortunate that I didn't ride the bike. But it was unfortunate that the poor test riders were getting hurt. And so that's why it was January of '82 before I got to ride the bike. We went to Lagos. It was better. And then we show up at Buenos Aires, Nick, not knowing anything that's going to happen, and how it was going to happen. And then with 8 laps to go, I'm leading the race and battling with Kenny and Barry, all race. Now it overheated, and I dropped back, and, Kenny won the race, Barry got second. But who would have thought? I know and Irv and all of us within HRC and knew where we started in January, that here we are at the first Grand Prix. That was the most amazing race in my opinion, we ever had. And we was for 3rd place was that we were actually on the podium with this bike, who, if it was the same bike it was in January, it would have been midfield. And I don't even know if it could have finished. It vibrated so bad, So they figured out, counterbalancing and, how to, make a counterbalancing shaft that had never been done before. And so, looking back, it's amazing. At the time, you kind of take it for granted, because you don't know any different and just in the moment and things. But I knew when we stood on the podium, it was a shock, absolute shock.
Then Spa came along, and you won your first race at
Yes,
a very special racetrack.
Yeah. I led at Harama, and we were running, total loss battery system that first year, which they figured out was not the best way. But I was leading at Harama, should have won that race, the Spanish Grand Prix, and a battery ground wire broke, and we didn't finish the race. So we had a couple of opportunities. But when we got to Spa, Nick, you're right. I immediately fell in love with the track. I mean, it was and still is my all-time favorite for many reasons. It's got my favorite section of corners. It's the double left, and I apologize, I don't remember the name, but it's Blanche.
Blanchimont.
Yeah, Blanchimont, yes.
Yeah.
It is without question my favorite section because of the entry into the left is so technically perfect that I mentioned about my positioning that you saw at going in the paddock. I always view tracks on positioning on entry, because then I could minimize how much I needed to rotate the bike deeper into the corner so I can maximize my exit. And that corner was perfect. Now, in practice, I never broke 2 minutes 40. Only Jack Middleberg went quicker. He went a 39, mid-39, 2:39. But in the race, I ran a 2:36. I went, almost 4 seconds quicker than I did in practice. And I was learning, and that track allowed me to utilize every bit of my mental acuity and my feel and my technical approach and everything. And I fell in love with it. In the race, I can remember like it's yesterday, I was going quicker and quicker, easier and easier. And I caught Kenny, I moved up through the pack, caught Kenny, and who was leading, and won my first race. And I remember, and everybody knows this,
I
I
know what
I
you're
I,
gonna
I
say.
come down the hill, right? I come down the hill, and all these fans are running to me, and I turn around, and the hill is kind of slope. I fell over, you
Yeah,
know.
you fell off the bike. I'd
I fell
never
off the
forget.
bike. Exactly right. And I'm partly embarrassed, and the fans are running, and Barry stops, and Barry was such an amazing person. But
Yeah,
besides being one of the greatest riders, I think Barry's ability and what he could do on the bike, and he showed that in '82. He's without question one of the toughest riders besides Kenny that I've raced against. And so his his charisma and his personality is what everybody remembers, but he was an absolutely great rider. And so I just want to make that point. But he came over to me and hugged me. And we, then there's a picture of me walking up and being July 4th, 1982 on America's birthday. And at that time, it made me the youngest winner of a Grand Prix race, which was breaking Mike Elwood's record. I was on the way, and it was amazing experience. And I still look back on it and in awe.
yeah. 83 came along and, well, the world title, but what a fight it was with Kenny right to the end. And I'm sure you know what race I'm going to mention at some
Of
stage.
course.
We have to get to Anderstorp. It was the penultimate round. You and Kenny were going at it like a couple of club racers or dirt trackers, man. Did you? I think
Well,
you caught Kenny by surprise on the penultimate corner of the. He
yeah.
was not happy, was he?
No, 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 no. And still,
I bet he mentions it.
yeah, still it's a subject, but things have changed a little bit. And it took 29 years for us to kind of get to where, our we do these stage shows and appearances, and we became like a vaudeville act.
Yeah.
Kenny would be upset over Sweden. I would say we never touched, which we didn't, and I said to him, because let's go back to the incident. And again, it's not about blame or anything. It was
No.
about, basically, I understand why he was so upset. He was upset because the previous corner leaned onto the straightaway. He got his worst drive. I got my best drive. It was the only reason why I was up next to him, because he had snowed me. He had used perfect racing tactics. I was so much quicker than him in practice and qualifying. Thought I had him covered. Then we start the race, and he had been sandbagging. Brilliant, brilliant move. And and this is kind of how the races would work in '83. Me on Michelin's, he on Dunlop's. Me on the 3-cylinder, him on the V4. Is I'd get a great start, run as quick as I could, and then Kenny would catch me, and then everything would kind of even out. His advantage with the tires, my advantage, whatever, would basically even out. And we ran 12 races that way. He won
Yeah.
six, I won six. It came down to the championship of, I knew that if I could hang on at Silverstone, and I'm just by the skin of my teeth, hanging on the ledge of a building, was able to get second because it rained.
Yes.
And if you
Yeah.
remember Silverstone at all, Kenny had us covered. I couldn't even get within the same second that he ran at
Yeah.
Silverstone. And so I was battling Eddie and Randy in the first leg of the race, and before it started raining, and I was in fourth. And then when it started raining, I kept pushing because I didn't have a choice. I was able to get in front of them by a couple of seconds before the red flag. We started the second leg. I held on to them, and my advantage in the first aggregate allowed me to get second by thousands,
Yeah.
right? So I knew going into Sweden, if I could win the race, which I had to win the race to be able to then, when we got to Imola, which had the 5 chicanes, I knew Kenny, and I knew that, he more likely win the race. And if I won at Sweden, that would allow me to get second at Imola. Now, all of that is in my race plan. Okay. And now he's sandbagged me. And I'm just hanging on to him. I'm going, unbelievable. I didn't see this coming, But beautiful, beautiful mastery of race planning by Kenny. I just have to give him the credit, So I'm hanging on as the race is going along. I'm trying to figure out, where I can maybe have an advantage. And the only thing I thought I could do, and this is exactly what my plan, I knew I needed to win the race. So everything was on the line, is if I could show him a wheel going in the last corner leading onto the straightaway, then maybe I could get him to tighten up his line so he wouldn't get a good drive onto the corner, onto the back straightaway. And if you remember me saying that the only advantage his V4 had was in the lower gears right off the corner.
Yeah.
So I needed to get a good drive because all I could do was stay in his draft, and I couldn't get up next to him to try to pass him going into that right-hander, which is the only place I knew I had a chance to maybe pass him. So the thing is leading on to that back straightaway, I'd done everything that I could because everything had changed, from my race strategy to what Kenny had put the position in with that brilliant, what he did in practice by not showing his pace. And so I had to, on the fly, change the strategy. Now, that's what made my battle with Kenny so great during the season, what allowed then the fans to see us pushing ourselves to limits that we, didn't even realize we could get to. So everything worked out perfect. I got on the back straightaway. He broke traction. We lead. Now I'm up next to him. Now, I know going into that last corner, since I was up next to him, I was not going to roll off until he did. Okay?
Yeah.
So, that was my mindset. And so I'm tucked in. We're going down the back straightaway. I'm next to him. And this is what we normally do. But because he had such great race strategy, I was expecting him to do anything to try to trick me. So when he rolled off, when he set up, normally that's when we set up and roll off the throttle and go to the brakes. Well, he set up, but I'm watching his throttle hand out of the corner of my eye, and he didn't roll off the throttle. So that was a perfect, I suspected. I didn't know what he was going to do, but when he set up, he was basically what we call a head fake in basketball. So he was expecting me to roll off, and then he would have the advantage, pass me, and win the race. Because we'd had, kind of nice races, and we had some great battles, but they weren't aggressive. Well, he didn't know mine was I was not going to roll off till he did. And so when, I washed his hand, he didn't roll off the throttle. I didn't either. Now we're in deep. And I know we're in deeper than I'd been before, and him too. So when we turned in, he was a little bit in front of me. And so that's why, and there was no photographers down there, but it looked like that I did. I was going wide and he was going with me. We both were in deep. The only thing that saved me was the fact that when he rolled, he kind of drifted off the edge of the track. And I admit, I was in deep. I assisted in that. He was in deep, and who knows. But when he went off the track, that allowed me to maintain and pick up the throttle. I got in front of him, and I led, and we won the race. Now, you're right, Nick, and he was livid, because I think there was a couple of things, and I said this to him, and Takazumi is the first time, I think, ever, where the winner was not in the middle in the car going around the racetrack. Kenny was on one side, I was on one side, and Takazumi got in the middle because Kenny and I are arguing. We're arguing, basically saying, I can't believe you did that. We get off the podium. He's saying that was just BS, and he is just livid. And we get in the car, and Takazumi, he was a character. He said, I'm getting in between you guys. And so he's sitting. So Kenny's going on, and Kenny's saying that, and I'm saying, you would have done the same thing. We didn't touch. Everybody knows I got crucified in the press the next day, because, I pushed the king off the track, and it was not a nice move. And I know it was aggressive. The championship was on the line, and 44 years later, Kenny still feels like he does. I understand why he was upset. He was mad at himself a little bit because of the try off the previous corner. I know that. But he also didn't expect it. Well, there were things, racecraft he had I didn't expect from him that he utilized. And to me, I just used what I had. I wasn't going to roll off till he did. We both got in deep. We both ran right. I stayed on the track and he didn't. Now, was that aggressive? Absolutely. Was it something that I would do again? Absolutely. Well, I knew going into Imola that there was no way I could beat him there with those 5 chicanes and his advantage right off the corner in second, third, fourth gear on the V4. And so that was it. And that allowed me then to be in a position to be there. Now, it's amazing. Everyone remembers that, and it's being a part of history, the fact that everyone, I still remember after when we got to Imola, driving to the hotel every night, because you mentioned this earlier, Julian, about we didn't have internet or anything. So I'd have to leave the track in traffic, get to a hotel, sometimes hours after finishing, qualifying, everything, to be able to call home. And my mom's first question was, you okay? That was right. And then I would explain what happened. But I remember driving from the track to the hotel those nights at Imola and listening. We'd stop at a stoplight, and every bar there would be people chanting, Kenny, cheering. And then booing Freddie, and then Freddie, and cheering, and people Kenny booing. Yeah, right. I still remember that there was the impact it had. And
he tried every trick in the book at Imola, didn't he? Slow the race, speed the race, slow, let you take
Oh my
the
gosh,
lead.
Nick. And that was something that I didn't expect. I thought he knew his advantage, but he would come to a stop, basically trying to slow the pace down, which I understand. I'd almost run into him, I when he did it, I understood that he was using every trick in the book that he could do to try to slow the pace so that Eddie could catch us, and the other Yamaha riders that Yamaha brought in to try to get in between us. But an interesting just fact, and we'll wrap it up real quick, but I realized that I could pass him on the corner Tamburella, at that time, the Fast Kink, where it was, in fact, where Senna was killed years later. But there was a bump going in there. That's the bump that Senna hit. But there was a bump going in there that Kenny would roll off for, and in practice, I would stay wide open. And that was the only way that I could slip under him, right? And then he would pass me, and that's how the race went. And he would park it in chicanes. But by me being able to pass him in that one spot, and it was not easy because he would roll off because that was the sensible thing to do, and I did. I could stay pinned and go under him. And anyway, so that's how that worked out at Imola. But it was interesting, Nick. I've thought about this many times. That I maybe could have won that race if I needed to. we were closer than I thought we were going to be, but I
Yeah.
didn't risk it, and I got second and was world champion. And it gave me my dream, Mr. Honda's dream. You know, I met Mr. Honda 3 days after that, first time in all the years being involved with Honda.
Yeah.
He didn't come to any races. He didn't, like I said, he wasn't a big fan of it going two strokes. And I found all that out after. And then he also felt it maybe wasn't going to happen. You know, that was the trifecta for him, was the Isle of Man, winning the Isle of Man, and then winning the 500 championship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what he set out to do at the start with Honda, didn't he?
Yeah.
Well, Jules, we love listening to Freddie Spencer, don't we? And we can eulogize all day long about it. But anybody who doesn't find it fascinating, and the history of it as well, the battle in Argentina with Sheen and Roberts, and then the incredible fight in Andersthorpe that really was the race that won Freddie Spencer that first world title.
It's
Falling off at Spa when he won his first. I remember running down pit lane down towards. You can run on the track then with Norrie White. He was at Motorcycle News. I was at Motorcycle, running down there to get the first words from Freddie. Then Freddie turned around and fell off. Oh, he's never forgotten either, is he?
no, and that's the thing with Freddie. He you know, he mentioned something like, I don't know, a practice session. And
Yeah.
it wasn't at 10 o'clock, it was at 10:20, you know, you know, the memory and it's
clarity.
stupendous.
Yeah. We haven't got that, have we, Jules?
No.
No,
And it's
no.
just a pleasure to listen to, talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
motorcycles. Absolute pleasure. And talk about insights and insights into what a world champion does,
Yeah.
you know, has to do. Just
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. Well, we got one more of Freddie. Next week is a really interesting one, especially for Jules. Me, as you know, is not the most technical minded person in the world. It's Neil Spaulding, who probably knows more about racing motorcycles technically than nearly anybody else in the world. And he's coming up with some really interesting stuff, isn't he, Julian?
He is, and he's also, because, you know, in a previous life, he was a merchant banker, no less.
Yeah, yeah.
He's got a couple of interesting thoughts on Liberty Media and what they have to do
To get their money back.
to basically to get their money back, to
Yeah.
justify the outlay.
Yeah.
So technical and financial insights from Mr. Spaulding next week.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And yeah, some people have said it's the biggest change in the history of the sport, technically. I don't think we quite agree with that, but
Well,
it's a change of electronics, it's a change of the size of the engine, change of aerodynamics. Most important, it's the change of tyres, isn't it?
complete, yeah. Yeah, I think that's, everybody would agree on that one.
Yeah. I sounded like I knew what I was talking about.
It is
then.
fantastic work.
Slightly, obviously working with you, Jules. It's yes, I'm learning. Very bit late, but it's coming. But yeah, but please, everybody, you're really enjoying Neil Spaulding. It's a real insight and into the money side as
Yeah,
well.
definitely.
Frightening, I think the word is. I would put, would you? The amount of the sums we're talking about.
That will do nicely as a descriptor, definitely.
And the week after that, Freddie returns to Freddie Part 3. And it's a real insight into winning the double. The only rider to win the 250 and 500cc World Championship in the same season. And an insight to what happened afterwards. He never finished on a Grand Prix podium again after doing the double.
Yeah.
And Freddie's very honest. And as always, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Freddie Part 3 is purely about the double.
Yeah, yeah.
You've just the first Freddie of 3 weeks ago was the Brands Hatch, the arrival, the ascent of the Spencer.
Yeah.
You've just listened to him describing how he became a world champion, and in a couple of weeks you can find out how he became a double world champion.
Yeah.
1 year.
It's good stuff. But Neil Sporting, I know you're going to find interesting. I've got Stu Shenton still to come on. Hervé Pontral said he's going to come on at some point. But of course, being French, he doesn't work in August, so we can't talk to Hervé till September.
Yes.
Peter Duke promises he's going to come back on a more technical side of things, which is going to be the featherbed North and then to the Gileras and everything else. That is going to be fascinating. So plenty to look forward to. Don't forget your tickets, motorsportstickets.com for 2, 4, 3 wheels, one wheel if there's any one wheel sport. I'm sure there is somewhere. Please buy the tickets from that source because it really helps us. And you can help us in lots of other ways as well.
Yes, just subscribe to your favourite podcast platform. Tick the box that you want to hear from us regularly, and it helps us enormously.
So there we are. Thank you, Freddie Spencer. Once again, we look forward to Neil Sporting. I'm off to the Isle of Man for the classic Manx Grand Prix. Really looking forward. A trip to the island where it all started, in 1949.